I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The room did not erupt when Camilla's secret was exposed. It became silent. Inside Buckingham Palace, 3 senior officials placed a restricted access request before King Charles and revealed that the Queen had quietly attempted to regain entry into Crown Estate meetings, financial briefings, and protected administrative channels from which she had previously been excluded. Camilla stood motionless as the final page was turned, because the signature at the bottom left no room for denial. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla tightened her fingers around the chair as Sir Jonathan Vale slid the cream folder closer. The keeper of royal records, the senior official responsible for preserving sensitive palace records, did not soften his voice. He explained that 3 communications had been sent over 6 weeks. The first requested confidential briefings. The second asked for a private liaison to be reinstated. The third proposed that selected Crown Estate summaries be delivered directly to her household. Charles read the pages twice and said nothing. The Crown Estate, a professionally managed property portfolio, administered under legal rules rather than treated as the monarch's personal money, carried institutional weight. Access meant knowledge of property decisions, financial planning, royal residences, and discussions shaping the monarchy's future. Camilla watched the king set the papers down, and his silence landed harder than anger. She expected questions. Instead, she saw hesitation in the man who had defended her through decades of public hostility. Sir Jonathan turned to the final page. A handwritten instruction in the margin had been authenticated by 2 palace secretaries through an internal review. It directed the intermediary to proceed before the new restrictions become permanent. Camilla's face changed. She asked who else had seen the file, keeping her voice controlled even as the answer threatened everything she was trying to protect. Charles looked at her. Defending his wife too quickly could make it appear that marriage mattered more than royal judgment, yet refusing to defend her would leave her exposed before officials holding a paper trail linking her directly to the attempt. The Queen searched his face for reassurance and found none. Then Sir Jonathan delivered the blow she feared most. Prince William had already received an identical file that morning. The Prince of Wales, the monarch's direct heir, was traveling to Buckingham Palace and had asked to hear Camilla's explanation himself. Camilla had survived whispers, hostility, and years of public judgment. But the man approaching the palace was not arriving as a critic. He was arriving as the heir whose future authority she had tried to enter without permission. The exposed request was not merely a dispute over paperwork. It struck at the most fragile triangle inside the modern monarchy. A king determined to protect his wife, a queen unwilling to be treated as ceremonial decoration, and an heir who believed the institution could not survive another generation of blurred authority. As William entered Buckingham Palace, each of them understood that the argument ahead would not remain professional. Years of buried resentment were about to be given official language. Camilla had carried that resentment quietly, for longer than anyone around her fully understood. She believed palace officials were happy for her to stand beside Charles during ceremonies, receptions, and public duties, yet became far more cautious whenever long-term planning entered the room. The Crown Estate briefings had become a symbol of that divide. They contained internal information tied to property, revenue, residences, and future planning, and to her, exclusion from those discussions meant being trusted as a wife in public, while treated as an outsider in private. Charles felt that contradiction more painfully than anyone. Alone in his study, the king looked at an old photograph from the early years of their marriage, and remembered how much hostility Camilla had endured simply by standing beside him. His instinct had always been protection, but now that same instinct frightened him. The documents on his desk suggested that loyalty may have stopped him from seeing how deeply her frustration had grown. William carried a different fear, as he moved through the North Corridor. The Prince of Wales, the title traditionally held by the monarch's direct heir, had spent years thinking about what kind of monarchy would eventually pass into his hands. He wanted clearer walls between family emotion and institutional authority. Before entering the meeting, he slowed, rehearsed his first words, and thought of Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis. He knew any precedent created now could shape the world they inherited later. Camilla had already warned Charles once. A private diary entry preserved by a senior aide recorded her telling him that exclusion from major briefings made her feel trusted in public but doubted in private. The king promised to review the arrangement, according to that documented account, but nothing formally changed. For her, that silence became its own answer. William had also challenged her access before. 2 years earlier, he blocked a request from her household for routine circulation of property summaries involving royal residences. He argued that the material went beyond her constitutional role, meaning the duties and authority formally attached to her position. Camilla never forgot that intervention. She did not see procedure. She saw a warning. Then the officials identified the man behind the new requests. Marcus Ellery, a former Crown Estate advisor, had quietly resumed contact with her household after leaving palace work. He had carried the communications outside Camilla's normal private secretary channel. The conflict was no longer only about what Camilla wanted. It was about the man who had helped her pursue it, and the earlier palace moment that convinced her she had to act before William closed the door permanently. Every palace crisis has a moment that appears harmless, until history looks back and recognizes the break. For Camilla, that moment came during a private dinner at Balmoral, when a discussion about royal residences shifted into a plan for the next reign. William spoke calmly. Charles avoided her eyes. Then, an official collected the briefing folders from the table and deliberately left Camilla's place empty. Nothing was shouted, yet she understood the message. The future was being arranged in front of her, without her. Camilla never forgot that night. The Balmoral succession dinner had taken place 4 months earlier, and its purpose was to discuss who would receive sensitive royal property and Crown Estate briefings during Charles's reign and after the succession. Succession meant the transfer of the crown from one monarch to the next, and the proposal William presented was designed to make that transfer cleaner, tighter, and far less vulnerable to private family influence. William kept his voice measured as he explained the new structure. Full access would remain with the sovereign, the heir, approved legal officers, and designated trustees, while spouses would receive only summaries linked directly to their public duties. Camilla listened as the folders moved around the table. Then an equerry walked past her place and handed the next one to the prince. She looked toward Charles. The king lowered his eyes. In that small silence, she felt publicly reduced inside her own family. Camilla confronted him after dinner. Near the drawing room fireplace, she told Charles that William's proposal made her appear temporary, tolerated, and untrusted. The monarch answered that it was about procedure, not affection. She did not accept that distinction. Procedure, she told him, was how rejection became permanent. Charles tried to calm her, but his refusal to challenge the plan only deepened the wound. Marcus Ellery appeared before the night ended. The former Crown Estate advisor, who had once worked around palace property matters, spoke privately with Camilla near the west staircase. According to a documented account later preserved during the internal review, he warned her that once William's framework entered the administrative record, reversing it would become extremely difficult. He then mentioned an older provision that, in his reading, allowed the sovereign's spouse to receive material while supporting the monarch. Camilla did not agree immediately. She asked Marcus to send the wording to her household, and he did. That request became the first quiet step toward the access attempt now threatening her position. Then the review uncovered something even darker. Princess Anne had objected to the Balmoral plan in writing, warning that humiliating Camilla could provoke exactly this kind of resistance. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, had urged a narrower compromise. Her objection vanished before the final record reached Charles. The missing warning suggested Camilla had been cornered more deliberately than anyone admitted, but when she finally faced William, the secret way she fought back would matter more than the injustice that pushed her there. William entered the room carrying no notes. That frightened Camilla more than a prepared accusation would have. He closed the door himself, refused the chair offered by an aide, and placed the copied access request between them. Charles sat at the head of the table, trapped between his wife and his son. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the prince asked one devastating question. Were you trying to support the crown, or position yourself inside it? Camilla held his stare and answered carefully. She said she had asked for limited briefings because she was expected to stand beside Charles through decisions that affected the monarchy, the royal household, and their future responsibilities. The crown estate material at the center of the dispute involved property, revenue, residences, and long-term planning, and she argued that supporting the king without understanding those pressures reduced her role to ceremony. William listened, but his expression did not soften. William placed one hand on the folder. He told her the argument was no longer about whether she deserved respect or whether her duties required information. She had used Marcus Ellery, a former advisor, avoided her normal private secretary channel, and moved before Charles had formally settled the matter. To the future king, that changed everything. A private disagreement had become a breach of trust because secrecy had replaced procedure. Camilla struck back. She told the prince that his plans for the next reign had become so rigid that everyone around him was being measured by whether they fitted neatly into his future. He tightened his jaw. Then William answered that his family had already suffered enough when private emotion was allowed to overwhelm royal responsibility. The words landed heavily because Catherine and their children were not abstract names to him. Any precedent created now could eventually shape their security, homes, and place inside the institution. Charles finally spoke. The king admitted that Camilla had asked him more than once to reconsider the restrictions, according to a documented account later preserved from the meeting. He had delayed because he feared choosing between his wife and his son. That hesitation, he now understood, had left her feeling abandoned, while allowing William to believe the issue had been settled. Then the prince opened the third communication. It went beyond general summaries. The request sought advance notice of planned changes involving royal residences and estate allocations, including properties connected to his future household. William asked why Camilla needed information touching Catherine and their children before decisions were finalized. She hesitated, and the silence was enough to deepen his suspicion. Charles reached for the bell. When Sir Jonathan entered, the monarch ordered a complete review of every access request, authorization trail, and communication involving Ellery. Until that examination ended, Camilla's household would receive nothing beyond publicly available Crown Estate material. The king's order ended the confrontation, but deepened the wound, because the review would now determine whether Camilla had made a desperate personal mistake, or whether someone had built a hidden channel of influence around her. Palaces are often imagined as places where kings issue commands, and everyone else obeys. The truth exposed by Camilla's request was colder. Authority survived through signatures, locked distribution lists, legal safeguards, and officials whose names rarely reached the public. As the review began, those quiet guardians faced their own test. One had approved an unusual meeting, another had ignored a warning. A third possessed the evidence that could either protect Camilla or end her influence completely. Sir Jonathan Vale sat alone in the records room at Windsor and removed his glasses. The keeper of royal records, the official responsible for preserving sensitive palace material and access history, had spent years believing that procedure could protect the monarchy from emotion. Then he found the stamp. One authorization code on Marcus Ellery's visitor record belonged to Eleanor March, his closest deputy. And suddenly, the investigation was no longer about an outsider forcing his way in. Eleanor did not deny it. During a documented internal interview, she admitted allowing Marcus into the administrative wing for what she believed would be a private consultation. She had watched Camilla grow increasingly isolated after Balmoral and convinced herself that one discreet conversation might prevent a larger family rupture. Sir Jonathan listened without interrupting. He understood sympathy. What frightened him was how easily sympathy had opened a door that formal rules had deliberately closed. Charles absorbed the admission in silence. The king walked toward the window and asked whether compassion itself had now become misconduct. Sir Jonathan answered carefully. Compassion was not the offense. Concealing what followed from it was. That distinction shook the monarch because it exposed something larger than one access request. His household had begun making private exceptions around a family conflict he had failed to resolve. Then the evidence turned toward Marcus. Investigators compared the wording he sent Camilla's household with the full administrative provision preserved in the official archive. The rule allowed a sovereign spouse to receive protected material only when the monarch formally delegated a specific duty in writing. Charles had issued no such delegation. Marcus had removed that qualifying sentence before forwarding the text. Sir Jonathan found something worse soon afterward. A recovered strategy note described Crown Estate access as the first step toward creating an independent channel of continuity for the Queen. The phrase went far beyond helping Camilla understand routine briefings. It suggested a parallel route of influence that could survive even when normal palace approval disappeared. Then a recorded conversation complicated everything. Marcus could be heard urging Camilla to move quickly before William's restrictions hardened. But her own voice followed with a question that changed the mood of the review. Would the restored access continue even when Charles was unavailable? The evidence had exposed Marcus's manipulation, but it had also preserved Camilla's own words. And when those words reached her private rooms, the Queen could no longer blame the crisis entirely on the man who advised her. The first punishment was not announced. It was seen. At the next royal property briefing, a chair normally placed beside King Charles had been removed before he entered the room. Camilla discovered the change only when she reached the doorway and saw officials seated without her. She did not protest. She simply stopped, looked toward her husband, and understood that the institution had begun adjusting to a reality in which her access, and perhaps her influence, no longer existed. Camilla felt the consequences deepen the next morning. Her name had been removed from the circulation list for internal estate summaries. Scheduled property briefings were cancelled, and her household lost the informal liaison that once connected it to senior officials. Any future request would now have to pass through the king's private secretary with a written explanation. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages sensitive correspondence and access around a royal household, and this new rule meant there would be no quiet route around formal approval. Camilla entered her morning meeting at Clarence House and immediately noticed something missing. The familiar red briefing box was not on the side table. She asked whether it had been delayed. Her secretary hesitated, then explained that the palace had stopped sending it while the review continued. Officials called the restriction temporary, but everyone close to the process understood the truth. Once privileged access is withdrawn after a breach, restoring it in the same form becomes extraordinarily difficult. Charles came to her sitting room that evening. The king tried to speak gently, but Camilla asked the question before he could begin. Did he truly believe she had intended to undermine William? He answered that intention no longer erased what had happened. She turned away when he reached toward her. For years, Charles had been the person who defended her against public judgment. Now even he was refusing to protect her from the consequences inside their own home. Marcus Ellery faced consequences of his own. During a documented internal interview, the former advisor was told he would be permanently barred from royal premises. Before leaving, Marcus insisted that Camilla understood the objective from the beginning and knew the access was meant to extend beyond ordinary briefings. His statement did not clear him, but it pushed responsibility back toward the Queen at the worst possible moment. Then Eleanor March produced the note. She handed Sir Jonathan a sealed message Camilla had written after the Balmoral dinner. In it, the Queen said she wanted protection against being erased by the next reign. The words exposed the fear beneath everything. William's future authority had become personal to her. Princess Anne responded without sympathy through intermediaries. She requested a private meeting with Camilla at Windsor. The Queen accepted. Camilla had lost access, trust, and the comfort of her husband's unquestioning defense. Yet the person now approaching her was the only royal who had warned that humiliation would push the Queen toward exactly this disaster. Princess Anne entered the Windsor sitting room without an aide and closed the door behind her. There were no files on the table, no officials waiting outside to interpret their words, and no king present to soften the truth. Camilla expected judgment. Instead, Anne removed her gloves, sat opposite her, and said she had opposed the original restriction because exclusion breeds resentment. Then her expression hardened. But resentment, she added, does not give you permission to build a door of your own. Camilla did not argue. Anne explained that during the Balmoral process, she had warned officials against shutting the Queen out completely. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, believed Camilla should receive carefully limited summaries connected to her public duties. Total exclusion, she had argued, would turn an administrative boundary into something personal. Her concern had been recorded, but William's planning team treated it as family opinion rather than a formal recommendation and removed it from the final papers sent to Charles. Anne watched Camilla absorb that truth. The missing note had not been part of a plot to corner her, but its absence mattered because Charles never saw how strongly his sister feared the restriction would wound his wife. Camilla finally admitted what she had avoided saying aloud. She was terrified of what happened after the king's reign ended. She feared losing her home, her role, and any influence over how the life she had built beside Charles would be remembered. Anne offered no easy comfort. She told Camilla that royal spouses eventually face the same painful reality. Succession changes power, access, homes, and public responsibility. Succession means the transfer of the crown from one monarch to the next, and when that moment comes, personal closeness cannot guarantee institutional authority. The Queen's fear was understandable. Trying to secure influence beyond that moment, Anne said, made fear look dangerously like ambition. Camilla lowered her eyes. Then she revealed the final secret through a message she had kept from Marcus Ellery. He had offered to create a permanent information route outside normal palace oversight after the third request was submitted. She refused. Camilla handed Anne the documented message ending their contact, proving she had stopped before his plan grew into something larger. Anne gave her one path forward. She urged Camilla to write everything down, surrender any claim to direct Crown Estate briefings, and ask only for a narrow advisory role tied to the causes she publicly supported. No excuses, no blame. Camilla waited until Anne left. Then she tore up the statement prepared by her lawyers and began another in her own hand. This time, she blamed neither Charles, William, the officials, nor Marcus. For the first time since the secret was exposed, Camilla stopped fighting to regain access and began fighting to recover something harder to restore: the belief that her word could still be trusted. The palace tried to contain the crisis through silence, but silence created its own image. During a televised reception at Windsor, cameras captured King Charles greeting estate representatives, while the place usually occupied by Camilla remained conspicuously empty. Within an hour, the image appeared across Britain. The public did not need access to sealed files or private testimony. One vacant chair told the story. The Queen had been separated from a sphere of royal influence she had secretly tried to reclaim. Buckingham Palace moved quickly. A controlled statement confirmed that internal access procedures had been reviewed and that Camilla would no longer receive confidential Crown Estate briefings unless formally authorized for a specific public duty. The Crown Estate, the professionally managed property portfolio, linked to the monarchy but not treated as the king's private wealth, suddenly became the center of a national argument. Supporters said the Queen had only wanted enough information to support Charles properly. Critics saw something darker, a private attempt to cross a boundary that existed for a reason. Charles watched the reaction alone. In his private study, the king saw the empty chair image repeated during an evening broadcast as commentators described Camilla as isolated and weakened. He reached for the remote and lowered the sound, but he did not switch the television off. The image stayed there. For a man who had spent years trying to protect her from public humiliation, the sight carried a different kind of pain. This time, he could not dismiss the criticism as cruelty from outside. William reacted differently, but not without discomfort. The prince received an internal briefing showing that public support for tighter access rules was rising. He did not celebrate. Instead, he told Catherine that necessary decisions could still produce unnecessary humiliation. She reminded him that clear boundaries now might prevent something far harsher later. William understood the argument, yet he also knew Camilla was no longer fighting officials behind closed doors. She was being judged by an entire country. The next morning made the crisis impossible to soften. The Chronicle published a full-width photograph of the empty Windsor chair beneath the headline, "Access Denied, the Queen outside the circle." The front page turned one absence into a national symbol. By midday, spectators had gathered near Buckingham Palace, some demanding transparency, while others defended Camilla. One elderly woman stepped toward the railings and placed a handwritten card beneath them. It read, "Duty needs boundaries, but families need mercy." The line spread quickly through coverage because it captured the conflict Charles and William had been unable to escape. Then palace officials announced the next appearance. Charles, Camilla, and William would attend a charitable reception together. Britain had delivered its judgment on the empty chair, but the monarchy's true verdict would be written behind closed doors, where Camilla was preparing to surrender the very power she had risked everything to regain. The final meeting lasted less than an hour, yet it settled more than Camilla's access to a confidential briefing. It decided whether love could coexist with accountability, whether an heir could enforce boundaries without destroying his father's marriage, and whether a queen could survive the public exposure of her deepest fear. Camilla entered with no advisor and placed her handwritten confession before Charles and William. Then she said the words, "Neither man expected. I withdraw every request, permanently and without condition." Camilla did not hesitate after saying it. She formally gave up any automatic claim to Crown Estate meetings, protected financial summaries, strategic property discussions, and succession planning material. Succession planning meant the arrangements made to protect continuity when the crown eventually passes from one monarch to the next. Any future information given to her would now have to relate directly to a specific public duty and move through the normal approval process. The door she had tried to reopen was closing by her own choice. Charles read her confession in silence. The king then signed a revised household protocol, setting clearer boundaries between the sovereign, the heir, royal spouses, and senior administrative bodies. A household protocol is a formal set of internal rules defining how royal offices operate and who may receive sensitive information. This time, there would be no uncertainty and no hidden route around official authorization. Charles looked toward his wife and admitted something painful. Her actions had damaged trust, but his refusal to confront the disagreement earlier had helped resentment grow into secrecy. He had delayed because he feared choosing between Camilla and William. Now he understood that avoiding the choice had created an even deeper crisis. When he took her hand, it was not forgiveness without consequence. It was a promise that silence would no longer replace difficult truth. William remained firm. The prince told Camilla the restrictions would stay, yet he would not demand her removal from public life or push her outside the family. Her handwritten admission mattered. So did the documented message proving she had rejected Marcus Ellery's larger plan. William could not restore access, but he could choose not to turn accountability into humiliation. The consequences reached beyond her. Marcus was permanently excluded from royal service. Eleanor March was reassigned, after accepting responsibility for allowing the private meeting, while Sir Jonathan was ordered to preserve the complete record. Nothing would be erased. The monarchy would remember the mistake, because forgetting it would make repetition easier. Camilla later arrived at the charitable reception beside Charles, with William joining them at the entrance. She carried no confidential folder and occupied no strategic place of influence. She simply fulfilled the public responsibility that remained hers. Camilla's secret attempt had not ended with victory. It ended with surrender. Charles faced the cost of avoiding conflict. William defended the future without destroying the present. And the Queen finally accepted that fear of being erased could never justify secrecy. The palace doors closed that evening with the matter resolved. Camilla remained queen. William remained guardian of the monarchy's future. And the crown emerged stronger. Not because the family avoided its fracture, but because it finally faced it and chose duty without abandoning mercy. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.